you know, that was likely to be a case for them of their own version of pre-competitive collaboration, even if it was with the FDA. You know, is this something that should really be happening? And you know, how should people be maybe looking at it? Should we be looking rather to get SPAs in place, something that's a little more formalized? What do people think?
I mean, I think one of the issues with what happened this week and what's been happening sort of year to date, perhaps, is that there's uncertainty. And we get guidance to move in one direction, and then all of a sudden there's a decision in another direction.
Mm.
Obviously, having more information up front is better, and it helps reduce costs and timelines. But when there's uncertainty, you're almost better having negative information and knowing that's going to be the case so you can adjust to it rather than the sort of, I guess we could call it a flip-flop that's been happening.
And I think that's the whole point with like an interact meeting before a pre-IND meeting, before an IND filing. But the question is, yeah, how early to ask some of those questions. And of course, the more you ask sometimes, then the more work they will then want you to do in return. And so sometimes it's better not to ask those questions. It's a really interesting setup.
Yeah, if you ask the question, they're going to expect you to follow through with their answer.
Yeah,
Be
it's
careful
always
what you ask for.
Yeah.
I always tell my teams that never answer a question that wasn't asked, meaning sometimes don't ask the question you don't want to have to answer.
Yeah.
On the other side, I think this is where we have this improvement that needs to happen on the collaboration. I mean, this is more with the agency, for example, because it's kind of a different situation versus a true competitive or true competitor in the field, is that we should be able to put things on the table, and it doesn't mean that we have to answer every question that we bring to the table because they're not necessarily needed. And there's an educational aspect, and there's also a will from both parties to learn from each other and understand exactly what will be the benefit of addressing that question or not. This
I
is,
think this comes down to, you know, those aspects similar to any other agency where you would look for scientific advice and you'd go with your technology and say, here's my widget. This is what it does. You know, I plan to be able to show that the widget works as it says on the tin by doing A, B, and C. You know, dost thou agree? And, you know, normally you can get a fairly straight answer. You know, the FDA has typically been a little more circumspect, and they've always been a little more loath to give direct answers, whereas Japan and the EU have been a little bit more comfortable saying yes and no. But I think, you know, I think this, to Audrey's point, maybe this is part of the brave new world that, you know, even that guidance that you get given is perhaps not as solid or as dependable or as long living as you might have thought it would be.
But this is also another great opportunity for collaboration among companies as well, right? It's like, oh, we were able to use this assay to show safety instead of the other way more complicated assay. And so being able to say, this is the endpoint we had to show, or actually we only needed vector copy number less than 10 instead of less than 5 because it's an allogeneic product. Instead, I feel like often we're all nervous to probably ask the same core set of questions anyways, but nobody will tell each other what they asked or how they got away with whatever they were trying to do.
Great point. Absolutely agree. And speaking to regulators previously, you know, often in the bar afterwards, you know, I've had them say to me, look, all of you companies, you all come and ask the same thing. Why don't you just talk to each other? And I think, you know, exactly to your point, Nina.
Yeah, and that brings us to today's discussion. Why are we in a paradigm where cell and gene therapy needs a new model for shared learning? And I'm so happy to curate this amazing panel of experts. I'm Audrey Greenberg. I'll be moderating today's discussion. And if you're new to AT3 or Advanced Therapies Think Tank, it is a solution-focused platform for advanced therapy experts tackling real-world challenges as opposed to real data, I suppose, head on in light of the Unicure situation. Anyway, we're going to skip the basics. We're going to get right straight to the issues that matter. And on this episode, focus on one key topic, which we'll get into. And it's bringing together, obviously, very disparate voices from the industry, including regulators, payers, and patient advocates to spark fresh ideas. In this session, we're hopefully, and I will get us all there, rethink what intellectual property structures are, and were they built for small molecule drugs, and should we consider perhaps changing them in this world of advanced therapeutics? And as part of this discussion, first, we'll talk about why the current IP framework can restrict collective progress, as we mentioned already. 2, what is it that this new model could look like? And 3, what actions can we take to get there? So let's start with an introduction of our leaders. We've got Priya Baraniak, Becky Cap, Raphaël, Ognar, Josh Ludwig, and Nina Horowitz, and my distinguished guest co-collaborator here, Sven Kille, who will assist me in fielding audience questions. So on that note, please feel free to submit questions in the chat. And with that, let's get into it. So Raphaël, with our first question, how does today's collaboration mindset, including IP, affect how you collaborate across suppliers and academic partners? What's missing in this pre-competitive collaboration space? And what is the new approach you would take to expand opportunity rather than threaten differentiation?
Yeah. Do I have 3 hours? Is that what it is?
You do. You've got exactly 10 seconds.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the whole group at 83 for having me today. This is actually a very exciting topic. It's pretty dear to my heart, actually, and I just want to emphasize one thing. So we could spend days discussing this, but I think the current situation, and you alluded to this, Audrey, is that probably the way we have been collaborating for decades in our field have been based on a type of medicines that have completely changed with what we do today in advanced therapies. And so the same way when we started to work with regulators, we started to have to come with different approaches because the metrics were wrong, because the different endpoints that we're looking were wrong or needed to be different. And we had to, in some way, educate each other on how do they understand us and how we will understand them. And I'm focusing this more on the interaction with the agency. Okay. But what we call the pre-competitive collaboration is not just this. It's every stakeholder involved in the field. It goes from the agency, but it will also go in some countries with the government, but it will also go with our peers, our academic partners, our competitive biotechs or pharma that could be in the same field. And I would say today, I actually believe that, unfortunately, I'm going to start on a negative point so we can finish at the end on a much positive.
Sounds I think
good. we have lost the concept of collaboration. Everybody's doing his own thing, is in his own corner, and is just trying to prove to everybody else that they are right. And this is what I think it may make us making more mistakes than we need to, and delaying potential innovations to patients because we are just repeating the same mistakes because we don't talk to each other. So I'm going to just stick to this. I'm sure others are going to come in, and I'll get back to it throughout the conversation today because I have a lot to say, but I also believe we have a lot to achieve as leaders to convince people to change their mindset.
Well said. Nina, love your take on what this means in general, and then also perhaps from a scientific side, where do we lose the most learning because IP protections, including product development, assays, analytics, and safety data, how would a new model perhaps for collaboration change your pipeline or your progress?
Yeah, so I feel like first I should maybe define what a pre-competitive sharing model might even be in cell and gene therapy. So to me, what that means is figuring out how to work together and make things that leverage all of our very diverse expertise, right? Like each company in the space is very different. There's this idea of gestalt, like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I really think we could save more lives if we work together. Some of what we're doing is redundant, but some is totally synergistic. But we're being blocked there, right? Extremely limited resources. Investors are like very wary of the CGT space right now. Everybody feels like they're competing both for investments and also for patients. People feel like they have to take a really safe bet. We're kind of hoarding our learnings. And so breaking down those barriers to me would completely transform our pipeline. So at ImmuneBridge, we expand hematopoietic stem cells. These can then be turned into any other kind of immune cell for any kind of immunotherapy. They can be engineered. And there's a lot of other companies out there who focus on the engineering and these custom differentiation protocols. But everybody's worried about IP, despite the fact that there would be this clear synergy. So we end up like in these long and very complicated negotiations before we can even start proof of concept work.
True.
And so I think product development for me is the one where we're losing a lot. Like if we could shed this fear, we could build more products, we could build products faster, they would be better products. Like imagine if 3 different companies collaborated. We had someone's cloaking technology, maybe Rafa's like HLA-G receptor, and then this was built on our cells. I think that would be an incredible product. But the idea of negotiating a 3-way IP split sounds insane.
Yeah, I have seen some of that with the ARPA-H funding, where they're increasingly, especially with this Thrive initiative, getting cross-academic collaborations to work together, and you do have shared IP. But I agree with you, it could happen more broadly and across sectors and in all different aspects, not only from product development, but including analytics and everything else.
Audrey,
Becky,
can I just say something, because I want to rebound with Nina. And Nina and I have been talking. Interestingly, it's just a pure luck that we ended up being on that panel together. But we have been talking about this type of synergies, and the reason why we are not doing it yet today is very important. Is that it's resource. We both need resource to do this because we both have a biotech. We have a plan. We have a direction. And we will have to get a little bit away from that direction to work together. And probably it will then allow us to go back together. But it means I need more resource at some point to be able to enhance the synergy and then have the benefit of it. So that's one issue. The second one is we know that if we do this, we're going to go through multiple back and forth with legal involved, with whoever involved. And that's going to delay, which by definition is going to kill it. And that's what I see, whether we work between biotechs, with academic centers, we take too long to find a common ground. We recently did something with a major academic center where we said, we're going to go to the minimum possible collaboration, if I can, for lack of better terms, so that we ensure that we limit everything to the minimum so that the lawyers are not going to find something to say wrong. It's going to be wrong. And we successfully delivered it. And we have an MTA in place with an academic center, and we're going to start working. But that MTA is very tiny, but it's the entry that we have to do. And hopefully we're going to be able to expand. But it just a basic MTA with no exchange of money, with no nothing, took 9 months. Which is crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's just very risk averse, and you have disparate parts of the organization, from IP attorneys to business development to people to scientists, all having to figure this out together in this new paradigm, coupled with the fact that we're in a very dynamic world right now, and AI may change the IP perspective in its entirety. But Becky, I'd love to get your perspective on, from a blood and cell sourcing network perspective, just relying on shared systems every day. That's what you're doing. So your perspective is unique, and I'd love to hear what lessons from your perspective and your collaborations could cell and gene therapy adopt to encourage trust and shared practice.
All right, so I'll answer your question. I'm going to hook into what Raphaël and
yeah, please,
because I'm like, okay, is that in and of itself, because I love frameworks, right? Can we get to an 80% solution and then modify it for a specific scenario? Is there some room for IP lawyers to sit down and say, what would an ideal sharing model look like? What's a legal construct that we could work with?
Yeah.
I mean, it gets really messy, but just a thought. And in terms of what I'm seeing, that's standing in the way, because even in blood centers, you do get some of that competitive, like, well, we do it a special way, and it's even better that way. With cell and gene, I don't think we know what matters yet.
That's
and so
a good
we're protective
point.
of everything.
Yeah.
One of the big collaborations that I've seen in the blood world that was enabled by knowing a little bit about what mattered, but having some very specific questions, was around infectious disease modeling. There have been over the years, and there's a collaborative study going on right now. It's in like version 7 of looking at infectious disease in the donor population. And as technology has advanced, we've gotten more and more granular about what we can detect, right?
Yeah.
And then looking at what the patient outcomes are. And then what matters? How do we refine our screening for blood donors to ensure safety, but not over screen and over exclude? And so that whole learning process is something that blood centers have shared. And there are, I'm going to call it 10 institutions that are responsible for putting that data together, because you have to have the donor data, you have to have all the testing, the donor background, the testing data, and the clinical outcomes. So you have to collaborate to get to that solution. It's very much like cellular starting material. Just putting that out there.
Can I just ask a follow-up on that, though? It seems to me that there's obviously these frameworks for sharing know-how and IP and things like that. But why is it that we aren't there with CGT? And I think you mentioned the top of your comments, which is maybe we don't know what matters yet, but also is there some hoarding that's going on or some competition that people are scared to share because that means they'll lose?
Yeah, I think they're directly connected. We don't know what matters, so we hoard everything.
Yeah.
And because if we by accident give away the thing that makes our product different,
but
we lose.
I want to push back on that, because sometimes we know that something matters and that's why we hoard it. Like, for example, cryopreservation protocols. Everybody in the cell therapy space wants to make sure that their cells have great post-thaw viability, and they will never share a cryo protocol with anyone. And it's not that we don't know if it matters. We know that post-thaw viability matters. And that's why everybody keeps it to themselves, is they had to spend 2 years trying to figure it out. Why would they let someone else leapfrog them who hasn't spent that 2 years, right?
Well, and if I think it's not only knowing what matters, but it's also, and again, Becky, you brought up cellular starting materials, that's where I've lived and breathed the last 13 years. And to me, part of this pre-competitive model, I agree with everything you've all said about collaboration and data sharing. It's absolutely critical. But we also have to agree not just what matters and how to measure it, but also what good looks like as an industry, right? And this is a huge issue for us. And probably one of the biggest blockers we have today is a lack of any sort of public reference standards and standard materials, right? So every one of us right now has our secret sauce or our secret recipe for qualifying starting materials, for qualifying the process and the final product and outcomes. And this creates a real bottleneck. So we really need that Rosetta Stone, right? That common public reference standard that we can measure against and measure what matters.
Yeah.
But didn't we do that?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Didn't we do that back in the days for transplants? For stem cell transplants, like many decades ago, if you look in the US, and I'm pretty sure many people even don't know or don't go there, there are a huge repository with a lot of information that is actually free to access from everybody. And but it happened along the many decades, and today we can get there. I think our challenge is how we don't wait decades to have this information shared so that we can benefit on it right now. And I'm going to rebound on the donor selection. I mean, I'm developing an allogenic technology. So obviously, I'm not the only one in the world doing this. There are many people trying to bring allo because we believe it might be the way to finally scale cell therapy and bring it to a competitive price or cost that may make it be competitive to antibody technologies, for example. I mean, if I can develop a cell therapy at the same cost of an antibody, then we become serious in the game from a commercial standpoint. Maybe some people don't want that to happen. That's another story. But what is important is that I am convinced that there are thousands of people working on donor selection characterization. Where's the data?
Yeah.
Where is the data? I am presenting data coming soon in a scientific event where we're going to share what was our first take on it. And I hope it's going to trigger some reactions from the community, and then maybe some people are going to criticize what we did or going to support what we did, but that something's going to happen, because I am sure that some people did it. But where's the data?
I look forward. Yeah, I'll keep a lookout for that. And I'd love to be part of the conversation after and see how it progresses. So Josh, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. I know I've heard you say that manufacturing needs simplicity and standardization, but from the perspective of unit operations or workflows, where can we safely open in terms of the end-to-end process? And what would be the benefits that would bring that scalability, make it more robust, and obviously bring the cost down?
Well, I'll go back to, so Raphaël brought up a good point, right? Transplant setting and how that field developed. And it was putting the patient first and saying, we're breaking ground. We don't really know what we're doing. And as a field, we just knew, or that field knew, or had this altruistic mentality of we need to get these to patients. There's going to be this, great benefit. And I'm sure there was people thinking, well, I've worked really hard to, figure this out. Nina, you brought up, cryo, post-thaw viability. But at what point, is it on us as a field and individuals to say, I know I worked hard on this. I know we used some of our money that we raised on this, but, I want to see the field continue to progress and kind of fold its way forward together. How do you break that barrier? Well, I think it's maybe easier from a tool provider perspective, because I just want people to know exactly how to use the tools that I've helped develop over the years. And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of groups, and I get this unique look where I'm like, wow, everybody's trying to solve the same problem. To your point, or to Raphael's point, everybody's working on the same thing. Specifically on the manufacturing side, I think there's very basics about activating, transducing, expanding cells in the cell therapy space, where, yes, there are method sections in publications, but typically those are, a few years old by the time they get published, and they're really not detailed enough. And I would argue that the next wave of understanding and information sharing is like how you actually set up a manufacturing operation, maybe not just one product at a time or one, production run at a time, but how do you actually set up a successful GMP manufacturing operation? Again, I would look to maybe, Becky in the blood center space and some of that experience where there are standards shared. There's clarity, and maybe that collaboration with the regulators was the key piece. How do we get that started as a group in cell therapy manufacturing? I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that, Becky?
Do you think that, or sorry, Becky, go ahead, and then I'll jump in.
Well, no, I think it's a really interesting model and an interesting question. The difference in the blood center world, I mean, we're somewhat limited by our geography, right?
Yeah.
And so there are already competitive limits set in place. So we're not serving a part of the country that one of our fellow blood centers is serving. And so let's think about how to make it all better, right? And similarly with the transplant model, that doesn't have a registration approval. That is a clinical practice, right? And so that evolved from clinicians taking action in the hospital and developing these protocols. So the publication of the data was a part of their academic growth and their academic
So is it almost hubris then within like the cell therapy space, where somebody thinks my CAR T is so good that I'm going to have the global population and 100% of the market share, so I'm not going to share it with anybody.
But I'm going to tell you something.
That's the vision we pitch investors. That's absolutely the vision we pitch investors.
But that's not realistic.
Well, but for the blood banks, it's like, I might have a 4 out of 6 match for this patient and another one might not. And it's objective. You're looking at the match or the mismatch, you get a score, right? There's not really a good standardized scoring system for cell and gene therapy products beyond HLA matching. And so that's one of the things I was going to ask you back on the manufacturing side is, do you think if we had like common scoring systems. You know, we can achieve this yield threshold, this purity threshold, this post-op viability threshold, and that those references existed, that then it would actually be easier for CDMOs and other places to get business, because rather than just saying, we'll make your product really well, and then you have no idea whether they actually have made something like this before, there's some standard check boxes that you have to hit every time you do a manufacturing run, and you can look at this CDMO's score and cost and this CDMO's score and cost and make a more objective decision.
Yeah, I think that comes back to those reference standards that we lack as an industry, right? And setting those and minimum criteria even for those, right? If we can't agree on the gold standard, fine, we don't need the Cadillac, but what's the minimum? We take a minimum viable product approach, right? So what's the minimum criteria, minimum standard that we have to meet as an industry, and build upon that? And we can iterate upon that. And maybe that's where IP comes in, right? Again, and there might be some innovation and invention that each individual can own, but we at least advance the ball more towards the goal line meaningfully by setting those minimum criteria and standards. And then how do we validate once? I think that's really important here too. There's so much redundancy in this field because we don't have that, and everyone is having to validate the same thing over and over and over. So working with regulators to have this validate once, use many times model would really speed the industry as well.
Yeah. So how do you do that without losing competitive advantage, you know, with these shared protocols and shared benchmarks to de-risk, but aren't you losing your competitive advantage?
Well, so I think cryopreservation is one of those areas where we could look at this, right? And there are some examples that we can look at, and we really have to separate competitive innovation from foundational validation. Your competitive advantage is your final therapeutic product, right? Not the solution you freeze it in necessarily. You've got to shift your mindset a little bit, that it's not necessarily.
I don't know about that.
Or the shipper that you use. I know I'm being controversial, so I'm going to throw that out there. And I know we have a proprietary cryopreservation media, so you know, I'm putting that out there, knowing that full well. But again, I think that we can define benchmarks against which we're testing and shared protocols that we can use to test, right? Instead of everyone investing in their own in a silo. So for benchmarks, and again, maybe there's a third-party consortium that we need really to do this in an independent body. We have NIST, we have FDA, we have all these others, but we really, SCB, we really need to pull this together, right? And so maybe just a level 1 cryo benchmark could be, we maintain greater than 90% viability as tested against a reference assay, a reference material. And, you know, 48 hours later, with 3 defined temperature excursions, we still get X. And the way we do this, what we use to do this, wouldn't be proprietary, and that becomes level 1 compliant. And that's what is good or good enough. And then we build from there. And then those shared protocols are really, really important as well, right? We need standardized, shared public protocols. So we're all testing the same way. We're using the same instruments. We're counting the same way. Something as basic as cell counting, we can't agree on it and get to a standard on, right? If I count on a nucleocounter versus you use a celometer versus a hemocytometer, God help us, like we're so far apart. So we need standardized protocols and platforms as well. And I think BioLife Solutions is one example here, right? They've done a phenomenal job in going out and taking the market. It is proprietary. However, they've created a high quality product and the power of that product and the reason they're ubiquitous is because of the shared validation behind it. They have extensive data that's gone into a drug master file, but they've also found a means of sharing this data outside the master file mechanism in jurisdictions where that doesn't exist, all without compromising their IP or giving up their market share. So there's definitely a way to do this. And so I think really not having to revalidate and being able to reference many times over once we have basic validation packages that are accepted by regulators just helps us all leapfrog some of these bottlenecks that exist today.
Yeah, it's almost like open source coding in a way. Go ahead, Raphaël.
Yeah, no, so I mean, so all this, I love it. It's great. This is a great example that that you kind of developed actually, Priya. But I'm gonna be a little bit like the devil advocate and bring back some reality check. The current world is only based on one thing: profit.
Sure.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares about why, but they want to make profit. And so we live in a universe where we are trying to make profit while we're trying to serve a very important cause, which is to deliver treatments to help curing or at least addressing diseases that patients are facing. And so there's a kind of an ambiguous situation here. We were discussing about the transplant situation. Nobody made money with transplant. Do you see the multi-blockbuster company that are making money on transplant? You see billions of dollar businesses there? No, they're not. This is probably the number one reason why people don't want to share information, because they know that if we start to put that on a public place, it's going to be awesome for everybody, but the money is not going to come. The profit is not going to come. And if you think about, and I'm not saying that I agree with the approach, but why today, and this is part of the elephant in the room, China is so strong in cell therapy. Why are they so ahead of everybody else? It's because it's been decades that every freaking big hospital is developing his own CAR T and trying to fine-tune it and to make it better, and doesn't need any biotech to go there to deliver to patients. I'm not saying it's the right approach. I'm just saying it's a reality. And we're trying to compete in a world where they are sharing information, obviously, over there, because they are improving whatever, not necessarily with us. And we are trying to do the same, but we are competing and not sharing. How do you think this is going to end? What is going to end is that 2 or 3 of us are going to make billions. Everybody else is going to die. And in the meantime, China is probably 10 years ahead of us on technology.
Although I don't even know that 2 or 3 of us will end up making billions. And I think this is a really important point.
Maybe
it's like,
even not.
You have all of a pie that's $0 versus a third of a pie
exactly.
that's $10 billion. Wouldn't you rather have a third of that pie? The most expensive thing is to fail a clinical trial. Maybe we actually would be making more money if we did help each other, because the products would be better and they would actually get approved for earlier and earlier and earlier lines of treatment, right? So in theory, yes, right now, if you have to have one product that maybe ekes out another one by a little bit, sure. But if we really want to make the most money, we have to make the best products. And to do that, I think we do have to work together.
But what does that look like?
Bubble burst.
What does it look like, though, operationally, to work together? What does that look like?
So I'll answer this with the first thing is that remember how our bubble burst. Our bubble burst in cell therapy because everybody cashed money before we got evidence that it will work in the clinic. Look at all those cell therapy public today that went public with preclinical platforms, and then they started the clinical trials, and guess what? They didn't deliver as good as we expected. Maybe sometime it did, sometimes it did not. And then they're all now at $1, and everybody's saying, like, how am I going to have my money back? This is the pure reality of the business. Now, how does collaboration work? We leaders need to make statements and need to go to the people with money, because at the end of the day, we need money to do this. No matter what, someone needs to put money in the bucket, and explain to them that exactly in a simple way what Nina said. Do you want to be the sole owner of a business that values 0, or do you want to share whatever we're going to be able to do, which will be better than 100% of 0, but to share it so we increase our chance of working? And I think there's one thing that is characteristic to our industry, and I will say it with a little negative connotation or funny connotation, is that we work like lemmings. When someone shows something, everybody repeats. So if one of us shows that or 2 of us at least, show that we can collaborate successfully, everybody said is going to be, this is the model. We need to do it. Let's go. Let's collaborate and make it work. So I'm joking a little bit around on doing this, but it's exactly how it's going to work. Show one successful collaboration between 2 biotechs or whatever, different stakeholders, and show that both can be happy. Yes, maybe I could do 10 billion by myself and I may have to share half of it, but I'd rather share half of 10 billion with someone and have patients treated and potentially off their disease, because I will clinch the 2 goals: addressing the patient issue and making money for the people that helped us getting there.
Yeah, let's talk about the culture and incentives and trust. Becky, I'd be curious to just get your take on incentive alignment and sharing knowledge to advance patient access. So it doesn't feel like you're giving anything away. Do you have thoughts on that? Yeah.
I don't know that we will ever get away from the feeling of giving something away.
Yeah.
It's balancing that feeling with either the model that Nina was outlining, or just putting that patient first, back to what Josh was saying. I think that's the key. And then kind of model, I've seen this work in all kinds of environments where you model it out, model it out.
Yeah.
What does it look like if we go ahead by ourselves? What does it look like if we partner with someone and accelerate? I am loving this idea of these early stage, you kind of the analytics, the starting material qualification, getting those things standardized.
Yeah.
Those are the things that make the process efficient, but they aren't the differentiate. There should be more differentiators in the product than just those than those baseline elements. Nina, you were that's exactly that's what
I have the best product because I know how to freeze it. That's not what we're telling investors. We tell investors we have the best product because of the CAR or the phenotype or whatever it is. Yeah.
So those things that shouldn't be the differentiator, let's standardize those, work on those together, and then put the creative work into the science.
Yeah. One thing I would love is shared safety or comparability data, like these reference standards, these benchmarks. We keep talking about this. And Audrey, I loved what you said about like ARPA-H does this model, right?
Yeah.
They put a huge pile of money on the table, millions and millions of dollars, and they say, we will give this to the best teams, not the best individual contributors, the best teams. Put something together that looks really amazing and we will fund it. And you guys figure out how to share the pot, but you're going to get this funding and you're going to get something that then you're maybe ready to take to the clinic. So if ARPA-H maybe could put some endeavor together to make a bread and butter CD19 CAR T and a memory like NK cell or whatever that might be, and run some standard tox, dose finding studies, we could have those as a benchmark. And then number one, we could get a sense of whether a clinical trial is a waste before we even run a clinical trial, which is super expensive and also wastes patient lives. Number two, we could have commonly used in vivo models, which then maybe it would be easier to compare products both for investors, for potential partners, for clinicians. And then if we had these reference materials to benchmark our cell products against, we could also go out there and say, hey, we saw this efficacy at this dose and this dose was safe. Now we can skip this, like give a minute dose to a patient, then a little bigger, then a little bitter, and go straight to here's a good dose that we know is going to work. And we expect to see this much efficacy so we can design our clinical trial accordingly. And I think that actually then we would save a lot of money. But I do want to hit this point again about the money. Like, none of us got into biotech to make money. If we wanted to make money, we would work at NVIDIA. We got into biotech because we want to help people. So I really don't understand why we're all willing to like waste our entire careers in the space and make a little bit of progress instead of take some bold risk and then actually help each other out. And I think the unfortunate answer is that each of us thinks our company can be the one that breaks through without any help. And the answer is that might be true some of the time, but you can stack the odds in your favor if you actually work together.
Nina,
brilliant.
Not all of us believe that we can do it alone. I mean, many of us, I think even more than we believe, it's just that I think people are afraid of saying that they need to work with others because you will be perceived weak or unable to do it on your own. Look at the world around us. Like, you have all those alpha males, 70 years old or more, that are white and that pretend that they know everything and that are telling you that I'm strong and whatever. They're all the King Kongs of whatever their territory. And at the end, they're unable to even manage the government. But that's another story. But what is important here is that we are in a situation where we leaders, particularly I would say CEOs of biotechs and C-level executives, and even the C-level executives of venture funds, of family offices, of like all the stakeholders that have a word to say, We have to put that freaking ego in the drawer and start accepting that, and I have no problem doing it, I need help. I cannot pull off what I'm trying to do alone. Why? Because I believe that if we are successful, what we do can be very big and can tap a lot of different issues that we need to go after. So come and freaking help me. And if someone else needs to take my technology and make it advance faster and better, be my guest. Let's work together towards this. I don't need to be the one that is saying, look, I was the first to do this. I don't care about this. What I want is that if tomorrow my mom gets cancer, she has a treatment to get cured or to get saved. That's what matters to me.
Yeah.
So
Josh, just curious really quickly on Josh, just love your take on recognition and reciprocity. What could we do in that realm to get organizations? You're sitting on a ton of great IP. So love your perspective on what organizations would contribute, what would motivate them to contribute know-how or shared repositories or to create open standards. What would be the incentive in terms of either recognition or reciprocity?
Well, I think those that have had success should look inward and say, I got into this space, like Nina said, to, for the science, for the patients, and pay that forward. And I really, honestly, I think it comes down to the individual person and say, like, hey, if my company, there's a question here in the chat about, if a for-profit company doesn't want to share in the secret sauce and the IP, I would take it upon yourself as an individual and say, why would I put my energy and expertise and career for something that I don't believe in? I mean, it really, I think, is going to come down to the individual. Now, what can then we do as an industry? I hope that the leaders and those that have had success are willing to pay it forward. Do some unique things.
But that's not true, right? Like, I think the elephant in the room, none of us have been is big pharma. They have the success and they will never share with the rest of us.
I don't disagree with that. I'm only speaking from my little world and what my little world has seen, and people that have been successful and done well. I see them pay it forward by providing grant funding elsewhere, doing, altruistic efforts elsewhere. And it's something that then I look at and I'm like, I want to build momentum behind that. And I want to do everything I can within my personal power to build momentum around that. And I'm out here at the SITC conference right now, and had the opportunity to be at some great minds and people that have been at the immune oncology space for 40 years, getting inducted into the faculty of immune oncologists, and to hear their stories about what they did. And they took the path of most resistance when they could have taken an easy path to success as, say, a physician scientist, a transplant scientist, a surgeon. And they said, you know what? Everyone's saying this is quack science, but I believe in it and I'm going to go for it. And again, it's an individual choice that builds on it. So what can we do as an industry? I don't know. I mean, you talk in this global sense, and it's pretty hard to build momentum, but it's the individual. So are you willing? Are we willing? Anybody with success? Anybody that has some novel? Maybe this is novel, maybe it's not. But you know what? This worked for me, and I had tried 10 other things that didn't work, and I'm going to share that information.
Yeah.
But do you realize? Sorry. Do you realize that we had collaboration during COVID between big pharma because people were dying all around the world? What I find interesting is that we had that pandemic that nobody saw coming, and we got a little bit surprised by the impact of it. But if you look in the grand scheme of things, yes, it killed a ton of people. There's no discussion about it. How many people are dying of cancer? How many people are dying of diabetes? How many people are dying of cardiovascular? So many, and yet we don't feel that same urgency to collaborate, to try to find solutions. Like, if we believe that cell therapy is part of the future of treatment, I'm going to preach for my field, which is cancer. If we believe that it's going to be part of treating cancer in the next 20, 30 years, where's the urgency? Where are the leaders that are standing up, going to governments, going to key investors, going to people with money and saying, we need help. We need to work together. We need to break that ceiling that is above us, because as far as I'm concerned, I heard about competition for patients. Yeah, 6% of patients are in clinical trial, and we're competing for 6% of patients. There are 90% of patients that don't even see a drug in development their entire life. Those patients exist. They're there. We need to work on it. There's so many things that we have to do better from a just coordination and logistic that will make it work much better. So it's us, I'm sorry to say, it's on us leaders of cell therapy to stand up and fight for our field, and not be shy anymore, and not compromise on things that we don't want to compromise, and compromise on others so we can bring more people to the table.
So I want to ask one more controversial question before we go into audience Q&A, which is, there's a lot of publications on positive results, but you don't see much on negative. So how do we change the publication paradigm to focus on the negative information so we know what to kill fast, so to speak, to support the industry without harming anything? Any thoughts on that?
I do. I have lots of thoughts on this. And I think that the negative publications, the negative data sharing is so important, right? This is arguably the single most expensive problem in our field, is the redundancy that we have, and it's self-inflicted. We're spending millions of dollars and years wasting precious resources, from donor starting materials to, actually impacting lives, like not saving lives, by working in silos. And part of it is because we just don't feel like we could be honest and candid about our failures, right? So looking at the chat, there's, even with the academics who maybe aren't motivated by money per se, they're not forming a company, they're not looking to raise money, they've got to there's still a publish or perish paradigm, right? I've got to get that publication out there, I've got to get tenure, I've got to move up within my institution. They have a different set of constraints and a different set of motivators, but still those are motivators. So we should be publishing negative results. During my PhD, I probably could have written 17 dissertations on what didn't work for the one dissertation I wrote on what did work. And I could have saved others behind me a lot of time and trouble, but there are some very clear reasons, I think, on why we're not honest and candid here about failure. And the harm, or the perceived harm, is really, really very tangible. One is investor fear, right? I don't want to be the one to issue a press release or admit on an earnings call that our manufacturing run failed because of a, unexpected starting material characteristic. The market just isn't mature enough to bear that, and we still punish companies that are transparent, or there is that sense that I will be punished for that transparency from an investor perspective, that I'm now risky, right? And all we're trying to do is de-risk to get that money in the door, especially in a capital constrained market. So we bury our challenges, we bury our failures, rather than allowing ourselves to learn from them, leverage each other's failures, and grow and move quicker and faster. And then there's also potentially a regulatory fear that's very real, right? If we're transparent with our regulators about where our process failed or where we went wrong, is this going to create a permanent negative record for our product and build an even greater mountain for us to scale to get regulatory approval, and for our next filing or our next interaction with them? So really, we have to create a safe space in this industry that really neutralizes those fears and those challenges. And it can't just be promising to share. We really have to put money behind this. We have to change the paradigm on how we approach negative data in a pre-competitive environment. And maybe there's a neutral third party that needs to anonymously aggregate this data and come out and say something like, okay, not Priya's company failed, right, to do X, but across 20 anonymized studies, we found that starting materials with greater than X% of monocyte contamination resulted in a 90% manufacturing failure rate. And anonymized data with large data sets that drive meaningful progress, I think, is really important.
I have a proposal.
Okay. I want to open it up. I know we've been talking. I'd love to get your question maybe at the end, but we have some great audience questions coming in. So
Can
maybe
I just
there's
make my proposal for a second?
sure.
I just want to answer Priya. No, but it's maybe, we live in a world where perception becomes reality very quickly. Sometimes if you scream louder than everybody, it becomes true, whatever you say. So I don't want to fall into this. But maybe a proposal is that we can reframe the way we present data. And instead of saying that this is failing data, this is actually, we can work on saying, what did we learn from this data that can be helpful? And maybe by repeating and repeating that this is not a failure, this is just a milestone in answering a question that we haven't yet answered fully, and bring back the one, because the fear of investors dropping us, or the fear of agencies or regulatory bodies challenging us more if we show data that are challenging is real. It's not a sense, it's a reality. Like, investors walk away if you have a negative trial or whatever. So we may have a responsibility on the way we design, first, how we manage expectation, and second, how we deliver data by saying, it's not a rosy world where everything is just like super good and every patient is cured and like this, but there are necessary things in this data set that are going to be positive and that are going to allow us to be better on the next step. And it's a little semantic, but I truly believe that we have made that mistake by promising the moon and missing it. Now we have to be more realistic on what we promise.
Well, I have a children's book called Beautiful Oops. If you have children or grandchildren, I recommend it. It's wonderful. It's simplistic, but it's really about the opportunity that every mistake or misstep presents, right?
Exactly.
And that's like you said, we've got to reframe our mindset.
Yeah, well said. Sven, do we have any interesting questions coming in from the audience here? I did see an interesting comment about the negative when I asked my last question about the journey to publication and what happens along the way, which I think was pretty brilliant.
Yeah, we've had a ton of really good discussions. The chat is definitely blowing up, tons and tons going on. No specific questions, so I would suggest go with the question that you had about publication.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we should close with in our last couple minutes here are exactly, what your thoughts are. Maybe your single most important action that could truly break the IP barrier in cell and gene therapy, or something that you think we should leave the audience with that they could take action on to open this up. So, Raphaël, why don't we start with you?
Well, I said I will have to finish on something positive because I started with a little negative spin. So I think as an executive in my company, and hopefully someone that can try to have an impact in my little circle, is forget about the pure impact on us as a company that we're trying to develop things, but focus on what you can achieve. Like, make small little projects, simple things that can successfully deliver quick, that can make, like, don't go into a ride for the next 12 or 18 months. Find a way to do a quick collaboration for 3 to 6 months and show that it works. And then next step is what you were saying about the 80%, like almost there. Show that you can be almost there. There's going to be positive things. And then maybe the next 5% are going to be incremental, the next 10, the next 15, until you have a very successful outcome. So I'm currently trying to do this with academic partnerships or whatever collaborations. I want to do it with other biotechs. And I'm actually calling on my peers here. I'm out to look for partnerships on anything that can help our technology or your technology getting to the next step. We sit, we discuss, we found a little thing to do together. Doesn't need to be spectacular, but if it gets out and it's positive, all together doing this, we're going to make it like a small little river becomes a huge ocean. That's the way I see it.
Okay,
so
Nina.
Go and partner.
Awesome. Love it.
I have a very pragmatic answer. So we've been talking about, sharing a slice of the pie, half of 10 billion, whatever. I think the best thing to do would be to turn the patent lifetime for something that is a translational technology to 30 years instead of 20. Sounds crazy, but because getting something from an idea to an FDA approval takes so long, you've already eaten up half to 3/4 of your patent lifetime before you're even earning any revenue. So maybe if we had a guarantee that on the back end, we would have a little bit more time to get that revenue, we would be more generous with who we want to collaborate with. You could share a bigger pie. So most other people, they file a patent, they're earning money on it in a few years. For us, it's 7 to 10 to 15 years. I think that if it's a medicine that requires FDA approval, the patent lifetime should be longer. And then just to make it a hot take, I'll say if you're a company less than 50 people when your patent is filed, so that we exclude big pharma from this benefit.
Interesting. Although we've seen that no one can rip off the biologics, it proves harder anyway. So maybe cell and gene therapies will be even more difficult.
No one can rip them off yet. I think cell therapy will be easier to rip off than some of the biologics, but yeah.
Maybe so, maybe so. Becky, what are your thoughts on this?
So I was thinking about how do we move faster? I learned so much when I work with a team. So my commitment is for our organization, looking at where are the infrastructure pieces where we can make a difference in scaling and distribution to get these products out there. It's going to take some creative thinking to get this industry to scale. But if we don't do it and do it soon, we're going to have a big challenge on our hands with investors swinging back to attention on other areas of life science.
Yeah. Josh, what do you think in terms of, what is the single most important action that we can do or that one could do to truly break the IP barrier in cell and gene?
Yeah, I think just a reminder that it's an individual choice and decision, and just because pharma is built to employ and keep lawyers fat and happy doesn't mean the rest of us need to follow that pathway. And just because they think their workers and how they swipe their key cards and breathe in their labs is all secret sauce, it's not. So I don't know, be the change that you want to see, share it, join platforms, and yeah, don't be afraid to make a mistake, because if you're doing it for the right reasons, people will see that.
Yeah, well said. Priya, what do you think? Single thing that we can do to really make a big difference in this
I've never
area?
been a good person at answering a single thing to any question I've ever
Give us 10. Give
I'm
us
going to
10.
caveat it with that. I'm going to say we need to stop privatizing our failures. We need to build reference standards and aggregate data, move to a validate once and reference many time kind of model by sharing data, positive and negative. And yeah, I agree fully with this panel, right? Build teams, join teams who are visually or aligned in their vision, their collaborative spirit, and the passion that we have to truly save lives in this industry, and take small steps forward to make it happen. We can't eat the cow in one bite, but incremental progress is still progress. And so, Raphaël, much like you, I agree. I believe in trusting our crazy ideas. I believe when you put brilliant minds who are passionate together, anything is possible. So reach out. I'm always looking for ways to work together. And I believe that there's so many bites on this apple to be had in this industry that we do not have to be competitive. We really don't.
There's
Is
enough,
you're going to start that journal?
Yeah. And make it public source, open source.
Open source, absolutely.
Ben, bring us home. How can we leave it with the audience? What are our takeaways, and what are your thoughts on all this discussion?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, everyone. I mean, just amazing. So I'm going to start off with my one-word summary of this entire session, and that is passion. I heard just the most incredible, amazing passion. Going down into a little bit more detail, I think there were two main themes that came out. One is about how do we share and share standards, processes, and things like that, and then how do we share the stuff around therapies, how we make therapies, how we develop them. And so, I think really it's how do we break down those barriers? And in cell and gene therapy, as there was a lot of discussion, is because it's still quite young, what is it that really matters? What is really, really, really secret? And what is it that we can actually share? And there's probably a heck of a lot more than we can share than is really secret. And we need to think very carefully about that. I think there's a wholesale desire to improve this pre-competitive collaboration space. And I think everyone here is in violent agreement that they do want to improve. The challenge is in the details is how do we actually do it? So I think, one of the takeaways that we will have from here is to create a list, and this will be hopefully a list that people can add to, of a variety of organizations that are already out there that are supporting this pre-competitive collaboration space. And so just off the top of my head, I've written down NIST, Standards Coordinating Body, HESI, the LGC Corporation that do physical standards, ARPA-H, Army, and there are a variety of other groups. And so I think it would behoove us to remind a lot of people that are maybe a little new or not that comfortable in the space that there is already a lot of pre-competitive collaboration going on. And so let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's make sure we start working with those organizations. And then, I think really just ending this off is breaking down barriers, and pre-competitive collaboration is really a conscious choice.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to end with Josh's comment that really landed for me is be the change you want to see. And really, let's go out there and be conscious about what is it that we can collaborate and share on, and what is it that really maybe not so much. So that's kind of my summary and my takeaway. Just an amazing session. Thank you very much, everybody, for your thoughts and your time and your inputs.
Thank you so much, Sven. And thank you to all the panelists, the audience out there, and to our season sponsor, BCA Advanced Therapies Network. Cell and gene therapy will only reach its full potential when knowledge flows, like we're talking about, as freely as the science advances. This session is just one part of a much larger conversation, and we need each of you to carry it forward. Now, exciting news. All of our future sessions for this season are now available to pre-register via the Advanced Therapies Think Tank website. I'll put in the chat at advancedtherapiesthinktank.com. We also have released all of our previous seasons on demand via the same link, and we hope to see you at our next session in December. But until then, think big, challenge convention, and let's be proactive about getting these therapies into patients. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.